think so. I think again, like before I started releasing music under my own name, I made loads of music that was kind of all over the place genre wise, like it was kind of back and forth here, there, and everywhere. Um, and it was sort of a case of like there were a couple of songs that I had made in my like past life that felt like me, like the most kind of like best suited to my style and my voice and the way that I write, and that was much more in the kind of chill, understated vibe. So I sort of, I guess, then worked on kind of trying to refine how I like write and arrange and produce around that. So yeah, it's kind of, you're pulling from like the sort of lo-fi hip hop type stuff. Also, like I'm not a particularly accomplished multi-instrumentalist, so if I wanted to do like a really fancy virtuosic saxophone solo, I wouldn't be able to anyway. So it's like I kind of have to be relatively kind of simple and straightforward in the way that I do things, but also there's, I guess, certain ideas and almost like mission statements I kind of have in my head when I'm putting something together. And one thing that I always want to capture, if not in every song, at least in every project, is the like a feeling of being in a hot bath. You know, when you like slide down and all of the hot water comes over you and you get that little tingle. That's like the feeling that I'm always trying to capture when I'm producing something. And I think the way that that comes through is often with just kind of a handful of elements, just kind of what, like you said, when you said you just let it wash over you, that's exactly what I want to hear, because that's kind of the intention, really.
The every song had that signature part where it sort of eases you into the song first, and then it'll either catch you with its initial pace or the sort of the hook you're going for. But I just found myself every single song just kind of like not concentrating because I was just kind of in it. You know what I mean? Like I was like a lot of people during the lockdown period when I discovered Nujabes and a lot of the lo-fi stuff on the YouTubes. And so it was really easy for me to get into your music from that perspective. But one of the things that I also noted is like the way that you sing and perform and a lot of the lyrics you utilize, there is, I don't want to say there's a vulnerability, there's an honesty. You don't go overarching emotional, but you don't also then come across as like indifferent to the emotion. Question I had for you is that again a deliberate choice? And if so, how did you strike that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everything I write is like extremely vulnerable and kind of punishingly overly kind of confessional and stuff. But I think that might be the case. That might be essentially me thinking about myself too much and being a little bit too like, oh God, I'm putting absolutely everything out here. But yeah, I just, it sort of felt like, yeah, that just ended up kind of being what I wanted to write. I think it basically it didn't help that like around the time that I launched my solo project, I was like super depressed and just like having a really, really shit time. And so like the atmosphere and the kind of existential situation that I was capturing there was a lot of like heavy introspection and kind of wading through the treacle of being, you know, in your 20s and miserable and what have you. And yeah, it that just kind of ended up being like when I sit down to write, it's normally in something of a like a therapeutic way. So I'm then kind of digging through and finding whatever words and metaphors and ways of exploring whatever I'm feeling as a way of getting that across.
I mean, just again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not a musician. Neither am I a particularly delicate reviewer of things. I have made these notes about the song The Gauntlet. Lo-fi vibes, reminiscing on mistakes, lamenting, split in time, somewhere else in the multiverse. The reason I wrote that is because I find that interesting, that particular premise, this idea of almost reminiscing about a time that doesn't exist but could have done, and being cognizant of that, but also being like that. Again, it's a balance of emotions. It's not, you're not really drilling into one emotion. You're being quite, it's the relaxation of it. I wasn't listening to it, you know, with pulling it at my heartstrings. I was just with it. I was going with the energy of it. I guess the question with that one is then, if you're saying that from your perspective at least, you are pouring your heart out and you are being quite vulnerable, do you feel like then that that's translated in your work in a different way? Is it expressed in a different way in your work other than in the composition of the song?
I think it I think it varies from song. I think some songs are more that than others. I think the Gauntlet is a slightly more. The Gauntlet is basically the plot to Everything Everywhere All at Once. I can't remember. I didn't think I'd seen the film when I watched it, but it's that kind of concept of you have this like decision paralysis of all of the various lives that you're able to lead, and you're kind of whatever you choose to do in life, you kind of end up, finding reasons to regret it because you didn't do any of the other million things that you could have done. And there's a bit of a sort of existential quandary there. And so that kind of whole EP, which was called Mirrors, that sort of had that as like a bit of a vague through line. And like from song to song on that EP, some of them, like there's one called Today I Learned, which was like pretty much written in the middle of like a full-blown emotional, not quite a break, it was almost the opposite of a breakdown. It was like the one moment I felt like human in the middle of like a really, really miserable period. And that felt like that was like every thought and feeling that I had kind of straight on the page. Whereas like some of the other songs on that EP are a little bit more kind of just exploring like the ideas of, are you making the right decisions in life? Are you at the right point? And finding different ways and kind of metaphors of dressing them up. So yeah, I feel like from song to song, it's like turning one dial up and the other dial down. You kind of get a bit of the very, very raw specific, like here's what I'm feeling at the time versus like here's how I'm trying to translate it into something that's a little bit more descriptive.